everybody. Welcome to Walk Worthy. I'm Erin.
And I'm Lindsay. And today we're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of people will resonate with, which is people pleasing. This isn't a topic that we've covered before, I don't think. Maybe in little bits. But
Sure.
I think there are a lot of people, and you even see things like on social media, like funny, videos where it's like, I'm going to do this. I can't even remember the joke now, so I'm failing. But basically talking about how people just accept, like, I'm a people pleaser. It's what I am.
Yeah.
And it's just a part of their personality, and they're fine with it. They're not fine with it,
Right.
but they're fine with it.
It's the same
because
as like,
they don't
I'm
make,
a mom,
Yeah.
I'm an athlete, I'm a people pleaser.
I'm a people pleaser.
We just
Yes.
attach
This
it.
is a part of my identity. I'm a people
Yeah.
pleaser. Instead of really trying to figure out what the problem is this okay for me to be? When is this bad? When is this good? Etc. So we're going to kind of dive into all that today. So let's talk about, what does this mean, people pleasing? Probably most people have an idea of what we're talking about, but let's talk about,
Okay.
let's define it as we want it to be defined.
Right. Yeah. So we're all talking about the same thing.
Yes.
That'd be good. I think, it plays out in a lot of different ways, but ultimately we are trying to get our approval from people. And I think it really speaks to we let it speak to our identity.
Yes.
And we're happy, we feel good about ourselves if people approve. And if people don't approve, then we don't feel good about ourselves. And so your identity, your confidence even can really vary and shift depending on how the crowd in the world feels about you.
Yes. I love that one quote. It's not in the Bible, but it says, like, if you live by their praise, you'll die by their criticism or something like that.
Sure.
And like you said, you're kind of, it varies so much because, I'm on a high because everybody likes what I'm doing. And then, my life is over and I'm nothing because I disappointed someone.
Yeah.
That is people pleasing. That is the tragedy of it, I guess.
The tragedy.
Yes.
The other side. Well, and it seems very nice. I think people mean it to be like, I'll do whatever you want. And it's kind and loving. And the reality is, it's not true kindness. It is actually very self-serving because we are acquiescing to people's demands so that we get something in return. So it really is ultimately about us. As much as we think, we're people pleasing and we're doing what people want us to do, so people love us, the truth is we want them to love us so we feel good about ourselves. So it's a very self-serving, it's not like true love is sacrificing and kindness for the sake of somebody else. You're kind for the sake of yourself.
So how would we kind of like help people differentiate between those two? I know it's kind of tricky, but there might be someone that's like, I should never do anything for anybody.
Never
those
do anything
extreme
for
personalities.
anybody.
It's like, this is for me, so I shouldn't do it.
We should all be totally selfish.
Yeah.
Right. It is tricky. There's a tricky line because there are things that I do for other people. A lot of things that I do for other people that I wouldn't choose if I woke up in the morning and I was just going to design my day. There are a myriad of things that I'm not going to do if it's up to me. So there are things as a follower of Christ, being obedient to what he's called me to, that I lay my life down for, and I do them out of kindness for those people. But I'm not seeking their approval in return or their praise in return. I'm doing this because I'm being obedient to the Lord.
Yes. So probably people pleasing is not leading you to obey the Lord.
Often it's not.
Yeah. It's just you're doing something for the sake of doing something for someone else.
Yeah. And we really, in that way, make other people our master.
Yeah.
Because we're bowing to their commands and their wishes instead of asking the Lord, is this what you've called me to do? So maybe that's the difference. It's like, which master are you serving? Because there are times the reality is that I'm doing things that I don't want to do for people's sake, and there are times I'm doing things I don't want to do for the Lord's sake.
Yeah.
Or like, I don't really want to do this, but I know you're calling me to do that. And the feeling is the same.
Yeah.
It feels exactly the same.
Yes. But who is on the other end of it?
One is obedience and one is not necessarily.
Yes. And that can come out in like so many different ways. Just saying yes to things, anything anybody ever asks you. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Or, even in more serious ways where you're in a situation where, we always talk about teenagers doing this, but adults as well, where you're in a situation with people and everybody's, it's a social situation. Maybe like everybody's getting drunk or, whatever those things are going along. You don't want to be the weird one.
Right.
You just go along with the crowd, or everybody's seeing this movie and I don't really think I should, but I don't want to be the weird one.
Right.
So I'm just going to do it.
Yeah. Relationships where you're
Yes.
too far with physical boundaries because you're trying to please the other person.
You don't want them to leave you.
Right.
Yes.
So many things. That's probably its own message someday. But
Right.
I think too, one of the big ways is with our kids, and you see parents, they are afraid to hold the line. I remember one time a father came up, Wes had spoken something, I don't remember what the message was about, but there was something in there about discipline in kids and holding a line in some way. And a dad, our kids were a little younger at the time. I think our oldest was maybe 12 or 13. Our kids didn't have phones. He must have said something about taking phones away. And so the dad came over and was like, you know, I'd like to see you try, you know, with your kids. And Wes is like, I'd take that phone and throw it in the lake. You know, he's like, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
But the dad was saying, admitting that there was some kind of an issue with their kid, but they weren't, you know, to take the phone away. My goodness, they would throw such a hissy fit that they wouldn't do that. And so really you're pleasing your child.
Yes.
You're not obeying the Lord and disciplining your child, but you want to, or, you know, God has said, discipline your kids, but you're afraid to do it because they'll freak out so much. So you please your child by, okay, fine, have it.
You just don't want a problem.
Yeah, you don't want a problem. And I think about that with, you know, people get peer pressured into letting their kids go to houses they're not comfortable with, sleepovers they're not comfortable with, prom dates they're not comfortable with, having devices and social media. And I feel that too. You know, my kids will be like, hey, I want this app. And I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
And everybody else has it. And I'm the weird, sorry.
Yeah.
You know, but you feel the pressure of,
oh, sure.
dude, should I say yes? Am I being crazy?
Am I not a cool mom now?
Did I lose my cool mom badge?
Yeah, exactly.
But so you can really people please with your kids.
Yeah. And I think it would be difficult for a lot of people to think about it that way. So that's a good point. I think a lot of times too, and we're afraid to just stand for our faith. That's kind of like an obvious one, for righteousness in your kids' lives, in your own life. You just don't want to make any waves, don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. So you're afraid to, you don't want to be ridiculed. You don't want to be the weird one.
Yeah.
And so that comes out in a huge way. So we're just silent.
Yeah.
Or we just lie about what we believe, or cover it up, or say only this one thing because that's enough. They get what I mean.
And school's a big place for that. I was talking to a kid last week, and she was saying, you know, I'm going back to high school and I want to stand for what's right. She's like, but it's becoming increasingly hostile to be a Christian. And she was saying she wants to be able to stand, but it's hard because it's not popular. Yeah. And I kind of was like, you know, I prayed with her, said some words, but ultimately I said, you have to be willing to stand alone, and I'm sorry. And that's hard. But even in our workplace and our jobs, people might not invite you to go out for after work drinks or whatever the thing is, because you're not cool and you're not going to do all the same things. The golf trips, outings, or, you know, whatever people do. I don't really know.
People golf, right?
People golf. I'm not sure. Girls' weekends that you used to be a part of.
For sure.
All that stuff. But because when you stand for something, you get cut out, but we're afraid of the social consequence. Yeah. And so that is a form of people pleasing. We just go along because we don't want to be cut out of that.
Well, and even taking it inside the doors of the church, like, you know, we want to please everybody in the church too. Not being willing to confront somebody about something, maybe there's sin in their life and you feel like God might be calling you to talk to them about it, but who wants to do that? Nobody wants to. And if you want to do it, you're not the person to do it. Just a side note. But like, nobody wants to do that, but maybe you feel like, I think God's calling me to do this. It would be so much easier to just be like, look away, because we don't want them to not like us. We don't want them to say, you're judging me, and like all the things that people say. And that's really difficult. That is very difficult, because we're supposed to be, you know, unified, and we're all working towards the same goal. And so when there's a break in that, it's even worse.
So hard. Or even people serve in 15 different places because they don't want to say no. Yeah. Like, oh, they asked me to serve, and so I should do it. You know, it's like, okay. Again, did the Lord ask you to? Is this of the Lord? And you want but it's hard because you feel the spiritual pressure in a way to be able to carry it. You don't want to admit that you can't.
Right. Exactly. But I think in some ways too, that is almost trying to, you know, earn our righteousness too. Like, we want them to think like we're godly, we're spiritual, so we're going to add all these things to our list. And that's not good either. Like, that's not what God calls us to. Yeah. So, and we see this a lot in the Bible. So, like, so many examples.
We were
like, all these are only from like the first 4 books of the Bible.
We were studying through, and it was like, okay, well, that's probably enough.
Yeah.
Like, you could go.
Yeah. I mean, it's at the core at the root of people pleasing is our pride. And that is at the core of most of our sin.
Yes.
All of
so
our sin.
much pride. We all have so much pride. And if you don't think you have so much pride,
Again,
we have so much pride.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Adam from the very beginning. Eve takes the fruit, and then Adam is with his wife, knows what the command of the Lord is, he has literally seen God face to face say, hey, don't do this one thing you can't do. Whatever else you want.
Just one.
It's good. This is the one thing. And she's like, here, Adam. He's like, okay.
Yeah, he's like, okay, she's going to think I'm not cool if I don't take it. Because all humans are the same.
Yes.
We're all the same. It's not like Adam and Eve didn't have thoughts like that.
Yeah. So crazy.
Yeah. So
sometimes, this is a total side note. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he would have told the line and she didn't. Like, did she get kicked out and not him?
And only women have sinful natures. What?
Then what happens?
Yeah, so
Does she
true.
get banished from Eden? Wouldn't that be weird?
Yeah, maybe he would have been like, yeah, this was a bad creation and women don't exist.
Never mind, you don't need a helper.
Exactly. You were fine by yourself. That's
One gender,
so
like
crazy.
the very first couple. They didn't even have kids yet.
Yep.
Just the very first couple. Oh, you couldn't even just do what God asked you to do.
Yeah. Wow, that would be crazy.
Anyway, random thoughts. Totally irrelevant. Doesn't matter to anything.
Right. But he was pleasing the one other person on earth.
One other. There's only one.
And you had to please her. Exactly.
Like,
So
I see God face to face, but this woman.
yeah, literally, how did she trump that? That's
crazy.
Crazy to think.
Yeah.
Wow, we are just messed up.
Yeah.
Truly.
Sad.
We're all the same. But then you see it even further on. I think of like Samson and Delilah.
Oh, man.
Where his heart was with her, the Bible says, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever she wanted, I'll tell her whatever she wants. And it ended up costing him his strength. He was slavery, yeah, down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
This decision
his
killed
vision,
you. Yes.
and then his life. Yeah.
Yes.
Just wanting
freedom,
to please her.
Yeah, your eyesight, and then eventually your life. But
So many things.
yeah, because he finally was pestered by her and gave in. Like, oh, fine.
Right. Exactly. Even that, I think that we can get like that too. Like maybe we can hold the line for a little bit, but then maybe the ridicule comes, or it's hard.
Yeah, it can be
it's
exhausting.
hard to do what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so there comes a point where it's like, whatever, this would just be easier, so I'm just gonna do it.
Right. Yeah, Abraham and Sarah. She's like, here's my maid. And he's like, oh, all right. You know?
Yeah.
And we have problems to this day because of that, because those two sons from the same person, and it's a mess. And one of the ones that I think about maybe the most, because it says, is Pilate in Jesus, when the Israelites were crying out for them, to crucify Jesus. And Pilate, it says, he wanted to satisfy the crowd. And so he's like, okay, I washed my hands of this man, as though that absolves him of some decision. But the motive is, he wants to keep the influence, he wants the power, and he wants to satisfy the people, and so he kills the Messiah.
That's crazy. I like what you said about wanting to keep the influence and the power. Like sometimes we feel like, oh, but I have this place in these people's lives, and that's what's really threatened, is like, I'm gonna drop a couple bars. I'm not gonna be as important to them. They're not going to think, we keep saying cool, but it's true. We want people to think we're cool in whatever word you want to use for it. And it really threatens our position and our influence when somebody doesn't like what we're doing. And it's ultimately, like we've said, it's self-serving, because that is the motivation. They're going to think this. Like, how many times, I mean, I've said that a million times. I'm trying to figure out, like, oh, they really want me to do this. Like, but if I don't, they're going to think ...
Yeah.
That's my motivation.
Right.
Even though I'm clearly conflicted. Like, my motivation is, well, if I don't, they're going to think this, so I should probably just do it. Like, I don't want to do it, but I'm just going to do it.
Yeah. Which is such a horrible attitude to serve in and to do things in.
Yeah.
Because the Bible talks about the Lord loving a cheerful giver. You're not cheerful with your time and your resources and your energy.
You're begrudgingly doing it.
Like,
Exactly.
Fine, I'll do it. But yeah, that's not really what we're called. It's not what we're called to. Okay, so all these people, coming back to motive, we talked a little bit about motive, but we prioritize, I think, the word of other people over the word of God in our life. That's how that plays out. And we don't really see it that way. We don't see it as harsh as that, but that really is what you're doing. I care about that more than God. And then it becomes idolatry. And it's such a subtle idolatry because we don't think about it a lot. But
well, and I would say maybe you're hearing the word of people more than you're hearing the word of the Lord. Like the Bible tells us in Ephesians, like we have to discern like what the will of the Lord is. Like, and if we don't know it, then all we're hearing is the word of other people. And we might think, oh, maybe that is the word of God. That is what I'm supposed to do, because we're not really seeking the Lord on our own to even know what might come up against that.
And you have so many voices between actual humans and people, and then, people texting and social media and even the entertainment industry. There is so much coming in all of the time that if you don't know what you're called to, you're right. I mean, how do you even know what you're prioritizing? You're just this is part of people pleasing. You're just kind of along for the ride of wherever it takes you.
Yes. You don't have anything to really like stand on. You kind of are just being washed around by the waves.
Right.
And that can really lead to just a lack of peace. Like, because you're not even, I think a lot of times you're not even really fully aware, because you're pleasing everybody so much you don't have a moment to like be with your own thoughts and think, do I even really want to be doing any of this? Am I supposed to be doing any of this? Is God calling me to do any of this? And there really is just a lack of peace because you're so scattered, running, doing all the time. And you never take a moment to ask God, like, what do you want me to do?
It's almost not a question.
Yeah.
And I can totally be guilty of this, where people will ask, hey, there's this thing, can you do this? And I will consult my schedule. I might talk to my husband, consider my kids and whatever. And sometimes I'll say yes without ever having asked the Lord, okay, do you want me to do this thing?
Yeah.
Is this what you're even calling me to? Just because someone has given us an opportunity or asked us to do something doesn't necessarily mean it's of the Lord. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's the open door, but sometimes it's just another thing to fill our schedule, another distraction. And it can actually, even though it's a good thing, be the work of the enemy in our life to keep us from, like you said, peace, from rest, from study, from investing in maybe your family, because everything we say yes to out there is a no to something else. So juggling those things and taking the time to ask the question, wait, but Lord, do you want me to do this?
Well, and I will say, like, I mean, just full disclosure, this is something that I struggle with. I have even felt a little bit like, who am I?
Sure.
I know that sounds crazy, but even, we've talked about trying to please the world and things like that, but even within like godliness and godly people in your life, I've been around people where I'm constantly thinking, like, what do they think of this? What do they think? Should I say this? Should I not say that? Would they want me to say this one? And you're like, like you get out from under it for a second and feel like, wow, I feel free.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I putting so much weight on, and they're not doing that.
Right.
They're not putting that on me. It's not like, oh, they've made fun of everything I've ever said, so I should not say anything. Like, it's just, I want them to be pleased with me so much that it's like, am I just trying to fit a mold? Or am I being who God called me to be and walking how he wanted me to walk and living free like he wanted me to live and what he died for me to be able to live what he wants me to be?
Yeah.
And so, but you kind of have to like come out of it for a second and be like, God, I just want to be what you called me to be. But you have to retrain my mind and renew my mind to be fixed on what you've called me to be and not on what everybody else is saying or what I think their expectations are.
Yeah.
Living under those expectations.
And it's hard. The reality is, I don't care how secure you are in the Lord and with yourself. The reality is that it is difficult to let people down. It is difficult to not meet expectations that people have, especially people that you love very much. To be like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do that.
Right.
And to disappoint people. I mean, maybe it's not hard for everybody. I feel bad about it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, oh, man, but you have to accept that if you're going to do what God asks you to do, that sometimes people are not going to be pleased. Because, again, you can't have two masters. And we can really miss out on the calling that the Lord even has for us if we're trying to please the crowd all the time. And, again, speaking from personal experience, I remember when I really felt like God was asking me to speak. And I did not want to do that at all, like at all. And I you're like in the place like, oh, I don't want to do that. But at the end of the day, I was like, okay, I'm not going to obey what God has asked. But I had to really think through, what is your number one hesitation? And the reality was,
did you mean I'm not going to disobey what God has
yeah,
asked?
that's what I meant. I'm not going to disobey.
I'm like, I'm just going to clarify what she meant to say. So someone's like, Erin said I don't have to obey God.
Thank you.
Which she would never say. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
See, this is why I didn't even want to teach to begin with, because you're like, I'm going to say something wrong, and then people are it's going to be a mess. Like, I might mess up on stage. I might accidentally imply something that I don't mean to imply, or forget a detail in a story that makes the story totally different and not fit, or get up there and totally space out and not know what to say and be embarrassing. I don't want to humiliate myself, all these, but none of that came back to scripture. None of it came back to the call of the Lord. That's 100%. I look at Moses and I'm like, oh, I feel you, brother, where he's like, I've never been eloquent of speech, maybe you should find somebody else. And I really feel that struggle. But when I came down to it, I knew God was asking me to do it, and I didn't want to because I was afraid I would make myself look stupid, which is a 100% pride and approval of the crowd. If they don't approve of the manner in which I'm teaching, then maybe I shouldn't do this at all.
Right, which is... Sorry, God, they're not into it, so I'm not going to do it. Yeah. Which is crazy. It's like crazy. when you really like zoom out and look at what you're saying and how you're saying no to God about something and yes to people, you're like, well, what are you thinking? And I love how like scripture puts it. Galatians 1:10 says, for am I now seeking the favor of men or of God, or am I striving to please men? If I were still striving to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. And he just says it so plain and simple, like you can't do both. If I'm going to serve these people, then I'm not going to serve Christ. If I'm going to serve Christ, I'm not going to serve these people.
Yeah.
Like, you got to pick one.
And you have to be a slave to one.
Yes.
And you are a slave to one.
You are, yeah. Like, you just are factually.
Yes.
You get to choose which one.
And slave to Christ is better.
Yeah.
I could just say that.
Absolutely.
Isaiah 2 is also really good. This one I have underlined in my Bible. Stop regarding man whose breath of life is in his nostrils, for why should he be esteemed? And it's just such a great reminder that we're all just people. We all are going to pass away. Nobody's cool. Nobody's important.
Nobody.
Only God is cool.
Absolutely.
And it says, why should he be esteemed? Why do you even care? Why are you even thinking that? Why are you even taking that into consideration? If we are going to be obedient, if we're going to walk by faith in righteousness, then we fix our eyes on Christ and we do what he says no matter what. Even if the crowd doesn't come with us. Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Nobody listened. Like, what a great example of not pleasing the crowd.
Yeah. He would have wanted to quit. Yeah.
Literally nobody listened, but he knew that this was the call of the Lord, and he knew he was supposed to make that ark, and he did, and saved his family, and nobody else came with him.
Yeah. I love that verse, and I think it's in Psalm somewhere. I should have looked it up, but it says, what can mere man do to me? Like we put so much on what men can do to us, when if we're following the Lord and we're in his will, like, who can touch me? And if they do, then like God wanted it to happen, but we put so much. I love that God just kind of like deflates the ego a little in all these little verses where it's just like, why do you care what they think? They're just like you. I put their breath in their lungs. So follow me, not them.
Well, and ultimately, we all are going to stand before the Lord and give an account for what I did. I have to answer for what I did with the time that you gave me. And I'm not going to be able to say, I didn't think people were going to like it, so I didn't do that. Right. I mean, I can say that, but that's not going to go well for me.
It's not going to hold up in court.
Right. What? And that's just so crazy to think about. But when you boil, and we all have really valid excuses, but when you boil down what's at the basement of those excuses, a lot of those, they don't hold any water. They're absolutely silliness.
So let's talk about how to fix this in ourselves. Which we can't do. Let's say that first and foremost. We're not going to do it in our own power. Only the work of the Holy Spirit in us is going to truly get this out of us.
Yep.
First point, it's impossible to do.
By yourself.
Yeah, like we can't do it on our own. And we also need to realize like how dangerous it is in our lives to put the approval of men over the approval of God. I think of like the Pharisees who God called them out all the time. Like, you only care what other people think of you. I can see your heart and it's not for me. He called them a brood of vipers and like horrible things. And I don't want to be lumped with them.
No.
If there's one group I don't want to be lumped with in the Bible, it's the Pharisees. So, Lord, please protect me from that. But yeah, it's just so dangerous.
And they looked, from the outside, they looked like the ones that had it all together. They looked religious. They were, about the work of the Lord. And Jesus came and said, you're 100% missing it. And not only that, but you're making people twice the sons of hell that you are, because you're putting on heavy burdens on them that I didn't call them to carry, and you're not helping them lift them through the power of Christ. So you guys are a mess in every way. And that's frightening.
It's terrifying.
Yes.
And I think for each instance, everybody probably has a different instance coming to mind of where they struggle most with people pleasing. You have to really look at, what is my motivation in this situation? And I'm sure new ones will come up where you're like, ooh, you feel that pull. But you have to ask God, God, why am I like this? What is causing this in me? And how do I overcome it? I think a lot of times it's our own insecurity. Which is pride in and of itself, but it feels like insecurity. I don't want to be the weird one. I just want people to like me. I want people to think that I'm, nice and like a good person, and they can count on me. And none of those are bad things. But if that's all it's for, then it's maybe not what God is calling you to, because all of that was about you.
Yes. The better focus of every single day is, and I'm not good at doing this every single day, but what if we really, I've been thinking about my time lately and how I so much think of it as this is my 24 hours. And then, you parcel it off to different things, but it's mine. And the reality is it's not mine. It's his. I'm his. I'm supposed to do what he wants me to do. And so trying to be better in the morning about waking up and saying, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do today? I always have a list. I always have so many things. And those aren't bad things necessarily, things that we have to do to keep our house running and our family functioning and, food on the table, all the things. But what do you have for me today? And being more surrendered even to that, because, and often even in people pleasing, I want to please myself is what's true. I want my things, my time, my way. And that makes me less willing sometimes to be obedient to the Lord, even in unforeseen appointments or drop-ins, or you run into somebody that's upset and you're like, oh, I should stop. I don't know if I really have time, but am I pleasing myself then and not the Lord? So we can even people please ourselves and not obey the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes too with people pleasing, it can become, I think sometimes it's just because we don't know what we're supposed to be doing, or we don't know what we want to do. And so we just latch on to well, these people want me to do this. We kind of talked about that before, but maybe that's the motivation, is you've never, maybe you're serving in an area and you're like, I hate this, but this person told me I should serve, and, this is where they pulled me into, and things like that. And we've never just stepped back and asked God, maybe what am I supposed to be doing in the church? What am I gifted at? Where can I be used? What part of the body am I supposed to be? And really, and in that you're just trying to serve. It's not necessarily wrong. You're like, oh, I want to be plugged into the church, but are you really doing what God called you to do? And maybe just taking a moment to step back and see what that is, and then jump back in.
Right.
So it's not necessarily everything is, oh, this is so self-serving, but maybe you just got caught up in something because you didn't know, and you just need to take a step back and see maybe what God is saying to you.
It's a form of self-worship disguised as serving other people.
Yeah.
But it's really self-worship. It's really idolatry, and we have to call it what it is. I think to be able to get free from it, we have to say what is true. And the Bible tells us very specifically, you can't serve two masters, and God is not fond of idolatry because we're supposed to serve him alone. And I think it keeps us from so much fulfillment and so much abundant life, because we're trying to worship at a false altar.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we have to tear down those idols, and maybe it's yourself, and maybe it's somebody else, and maybe there's hard conversations that have to be had, because maybe they're not going to like it, but there comes a point when it has to be done. And like we were talking about, you have to actually know what is pleasing to the Lord in order to please him. We have to be in his word. We have to know what he's calling us to specifically. We have to know what, like you were saying, what should be filling my day, asking him even daily, like you said, what pleases you today. And I was thinking of Romans 12, it talks about giving ourselves to God as a living sacrifice. And that's our acceptable worship. That's the worship that pleases him, is giving ourselves every day as a living sacrifice to him. So we have to know what that is.
And people may feel, there are times where you might challenge somebody on maybe it's not the season for you to do this right now because of whatever. And they'll say, but if I don't, it'll all fall down. Sometimes you have to just, if you know that God is not asking you to do it, you know, and I'm not calling people to be unreliable and a mess, but there are certain things where, you know, and I felt this myself. I know this is going to fall down and nobody's going to pick it up if I walk away from it. And I have to just, if I know God's not calling me to it, I have to trust the Lord in that, because he's either going to raise up somebody else, or maybe this is something that needs to die. Maybe it fulfilled its season and we're just dragging along a dead horse that is not fruitful anymore. Yeah. But we feel like we are so responsible to keep it going. So sometimes the things that you get sucked into that you really feel like you're supposed to be back out of, you just need to be obedient to the Lord anyways in that. But at the same time, I don't want this to sound like, oh, I'm only going to serve the Lord, so I'll never serve anywhere else. We are called to serve. We are called to sacrifice. Yes. We are called to please him and not the Lord, or not ourselves. I love what Colossians 1 says. It says that we are called to walk worthy, which is where this comes from, walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. And I think that's such a great verse because it's telling us how we walk. We walk worthy. So if someone's calling us to walk unworthily, well, we know we're called to walk worthy. We're called to obey. We're supposed to please him, not other people, and in all respects. And we're supposed to continue to bear fruit. So our lives should always be fruitful if we're pleasing the Lord. That is a byproduct of a life that is surrendered. That will happen. And we continue to increase in the knowledge of God. That kind of is, in a nutshell, what we're called to as believers. We please him, but you're supposed to also work to bear fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what this all comes down to is there's a bottom line. Like, what am I doing and who is it for? Yes. Is it for the glory of God? Is it not? 1 Corinthians says in 10:31, whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Bottom line. And that is really what you can come back to when a situation comes up. Like, okay, what is my motivation? Who is this for? Is God calling me to do it? And then go from there. Yep. And easier said than done. Yeah, I will say that as well.
But whose glory are you seeking?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
a really great.
But this whole Bible line is easier said than done. So like, this is what we're called to,
but be in the fight
whether
to do
it's difficult or not. Exactly. And you might not get it right all the time, and you might find yourself in a situation where it's like, why did I say yes to this? But just try to do better next time. Right. We all have to be in the fight against this, or we'll worship idols all day long.
Because it's who we are.
It's who we are. Yeah. And God is gracious and good. So hopefully this was a challenge to you today. An encouragement, maybe pushed you to take a step back and think about some things that maybe are in your life or that you've been walking in that maybe aren't for you, maybe are for somebody else, and definitely aren't for the Lord. So I hope that this was a challenge to you and that God will use it in your life. We will see you next time. But until then, walk worthy.